Lenox Avenue, Harlem, March 15, 1952, 2:47 a.m. The street was empty except for the shadows. When 40 men stepped out of a convoy of black Cadillacs and Packards, the few remaining pedestrians vanished like smoke. These weren't local muscle. Chicago plates, Italian faces, Tommy guns barely concealed under long coats. They'd come for Bumpy Johnson. Frank Costello's organization wanted Harlem's numbers racket. The Italian Commission had sent Anthony the Fixer Valone, a man who'd personally carried out 17 hits for Al Capone himself, to collect, or eliminate, 40 armed men. The biggest show of force Harlem had ever seen from the Italian mob. But Bumpy Johnson didn't run, didn't hide, didn't negotiate. He walked into the Palm Café at 135th and Lenox, alone, wearing a navy blue suit and carrying nothing but a rolled-up copy of the Amsterdam News. What happened in the next 6 hours would become the most legendary night in Harlem's criminal history. By sunrise, 37 men would be dead. 3 would limp back to Chicago, and Frank Costello would never speak Bumpy Johnson's name again without the word Mr. in front of it. But to understand how one man defeated 40, we need to go back to where Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson learned the most dangerous lesson of his life. Intelligence doesn't just beat force, it destroys it. October 31st, 1905, Charleston, South Carolina. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson was born in a shotgun shack on the wrong side of Charleston's already segregated poverty line. His father, William, worked on the docks when white foremen felt generous. His mother, Margaret, cleaned houses for families who wouldn't let her use the front door. Young Ellsworth had a large, protruding forehead, a cranial condition that earned him the nickname Bumpy before he could walk. The other children laughed. The adults whispered. In the Jim Crow South, being different was dangerous. Being black and different could be fatal. But something else came with that condition. Ellsworth was sharp. By age 7, he could calculate numbers faster than merchants with ledgers. By 9, he was reading law books stolen from the Charleston Library's whites-only section. His mother noticed it first. "That boy sees 3 moves ahead," she told a neighbor. "Scares me sometimes, sees things that ain't happened yet." She was right to be scared. 1917, the Great Migration. When Bumpy was 12, his family escaped north to Harlem, that promised land where black folks could finally breathe. But Harlem in 1917 wasn't promise. It was pressure. Tens of thousands of Southern refugees crammed into 20 square blocks. Irish gangs controlled the docks. Italian mobs controlled the markets. And black folks, they controlled nothing. Bumpy watched, learned. He saw white gangsters extort black business owners on 125th Street. Saw police arrest black men for looking at white women wrong. Saw poverty weaponized as control. But he also saw something else. Leverage. The numbers racket, Harlem's lottery, was the only economy black folks fully controlled. Every day, thousands of working people bet pennies on 3-digit numbers. The winners could feed their families for a month. The runners who collected those bets. They were the only black men in Harlem with real money. Bumpy was 15 when he approached Stephanie St. Clair, the most powerful woman in Harlem's underworld. "I don't need muscle," he told her. "I can count faster than your accountants, and I know every cop's price on every block from 110th to 155th. She tested him, gave him 1 block, 1 week. Bumpy returned with every collection accounted for to the penny, plus detailed notes on which cops took bribes, which store owners skimmed, and which rival runners were trying to poach territory. Stephanie St. Clair smiled for the first time in years. "You're not muscle," she said. "You're the knife I've been looking for." But Bumpy was about to learn a lesson that would define everything. When the Italians came for Stephanie's empire, bullets alone wouldn't save it. 1928. The Dutch-Schultz War. Dutch Schultz, a white mobster with backing from Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky, decided Harlem's numbers racket was too profitable to leave in black hands. He sent enforcers, firebombed collection spots, murdered runners in broad daylight. Stephanie sent Claire fought back with guns, lost. Bumpy fought back with intelligence. He spent 3 months studying Schultz's operation like a doctoral thesis. Memorized delivery routes, tracked protection payments, identified which cops were on Schultz's payroll versus which ones just hated him. Then Bumpy did something no one expected. He turned Schultz's own accountant, not with threats, with mathematics. Bumpy showed the man, a nervous Jewish immigrant named Solomon Weiss, exactly how Schultz was shorting him on percentage points. Showed him the ledgers proving Schultz planned to eliminate him once the Harlem operation stabilized. "You can die for him," Bumpy said calmly, "or get rich with us." Solomon handed over every banking record, every wire transfer, every police contact. Within 6 weeks, the IRS, mysteriously provided with anonymous documentation, raided Schultz's operation. His Harlem expansion collapsed. Stephanie St. Clair stared at 22-year-old Bumpy Johnson with something between awe and fear. "You just beat the mob without firing a shot," she whispered. Bumpy adjusted his tie. "Shooting is what you do when thinking fails." What happened next would set Bumpy on a collision course with the most powerful crime families in America. But first, he had to survive prison. And in that prison, Bumpy would meet the person who would change everything, a man who understood power better than anyone alive. Sing Sing Correctional Facility. 1932. Bumpy went to prison for armed robbery, a charge that was half true and entirely unavoidable when you were black and successful in Depression-era New York. But prison didn't break him. It educated him. In Sing Sing, Bumpy found himself surrounded by every major player in New York's underworld. The Italians, the Irish, the Jews, men who ran empires worth millions now sharing cells and cigarettes, and they talked. Bumpy listened. He learned that Lucky Luciano had structured the 5 families not through violence, but through organization, territories divided, disputes arbitrated, profits shared according to clear percentages. He learned that Mayor Lansky controlled gambling operations across 3 states because he kept 2 sets of books, one for the partners, one for himself, and perfect memory of which was which. He learned that power wasn't taken. It was calculated, negotiated, and enforced through systems, not shootouts. When Bumpy walked out in 1940, he wasn't the same man. He was 35. Calm, strategic, and hungry. Stephanie St. Clair had aged. Dutch Schultz was dead, murdered by the commission for causing too much heat. And Harlem's numbers racket was fragmented into a dozen small operations fighting over scraps. Bumpy unified them, not by asking, by demonstrating. 1941. The unification. Bumpy approached every independent numbers runner in Harlem with the same pitch. Combine under one system, maximize profits, minimize police attention. I keep 12% for coordination. You keep 88% of what remains after payoffs. Most said yes. 2 said no. The first holdout, Jimmy Fast Hands Monroe, woke up to find his collection route had mysteriously relocated to Bumpy's territory. Every number Jimmy called came up in Bumpy's lottery. Every customer Jimmy tried to win back was offered double payout odds by Bumpy's runners. Within 3 weeks, Jimmy was bankrupt. Bumpy bought his operation for $500 and gave Jimmy a job as a mid-level collector. "This ain't personal," Bumpy told him. "It's structural. You can profit with me or starve against me. Your choice was always going to be the same." The second holdout, Marcus, the Lion Clay, was harder. Marcus had muscle, 15 armed men, a reputation for brutality. Bumpy didn't fight him. He bought Marcus's landlord, his number's supplier, and his wife's beauty salon debt. Then Bumpy showed Marcus the paperwork. Every asset Marcus thought he owned was actually collateral Bumpy now controlled. "We can be partners," Bumpy said quietly, "or I can foreclose on your entire life by Friday." Marcus looked at the contracts, looked at Bumpy, extended his hand. But there was one problem Bumpy couldn't solve with strategy alone. The Genovese family was coming, and they wanted Harlem's $20 million annual numbers profit for themselves. By 1945, Bumpy Johnson controlled 90% of Harlem's numbers operations, 40 runners, 12 collection houses, police from 6 precincts on the payroll, weekly gross, $380,000. But money wasn't what made him powerful. Respect was. Bumpy paid for funerals when families couldn't afford them, funded Negro League baseball teams, kept dealers away from schools and heroin out of teenage hands. When landlords tried to evict families, Bumpy convinced them otherwise. Harlem didn't fear him. Harlem loved him. Frank Costello, now head of the Luciano family, sent an emissary to feel out Bumpy's operation. The man returned with a message. "Boss," the emissary said carefully, "if we move on Johnson, every black face in Harlem becomes our enemy. We'll win the territory and lose the profit. The man's got the whole neighborhood." Costello lit a cigar. "Then we don't move yet, but eventually that neighborhood's gonna have to choose between love and survival." And that's when Bumpy made an enemy who wouldn't be bought or intimidated. Anthony Valone, the man they called the Fixer, who'd learned his craft from Al Capone himself. Valone had one specialty, taking territories that diplomacy couldn't win. He'd cleared Chicago's South Side in 1929, secured Boston's North End in 1934, Philadelphia's waterfront in 1938. Every time the same method, overwhelming force, executed without mercy, concluded in less than 48 hours. Valone studied resistance. Then he annihilated it. Everything Bumpy had built was about to be threatened by 40 armed men, a convoy of death, and a man who'd never lost a territorial war in his entire career. Anthony, the Fixer Valone, born in Sicily, raised in Chicago, trained by Al Capone during Prohibition. Valone wasn't a gangster. He was a mathematician of violence. When Capone needed the South Side cleared of Irish competition in 1929, Valone coordinated the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Not just the shooting, but the intelligence network that identified all 7 targets, the police payoffs that ensured no interruption, and the alibi structure that kept Capone legally untouchable. 17 confirmed kills, never spent a day in jail. After Capone's imprisonment, Valone became a freelance problem solver for the commission. His rate, 25% of the first year's profit from whatever territory he secured. His success rate, 100%. Valone doesn't fight wars, one FBI memo noted. He executes mathematical conclusions. His method was simple. Study the target for 2 weeks. Identify every asset, ally, and weakness. Then deploy overwhelming force in a synchronized strike that eliminated leadership, infrastructure, and morale simultaneously. Total casualties, always high. Survivors, always broken. Duration, never more than 3 days. January 1952. Frank Costello's patience ran out. Harlem's numbers racket was generating $20 million annually, money the 5 families believed belonged to them by right of power. The commission met in a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. "Johnson's got Harlem locked," Costello told the table. "We need a specialist." Vito Genovese leaned back. "You want Valone?" Costello nodded. The vote was unanimous. 2 weeks later, Anthony Valone arrived in New York with a simple mandate: take Harlem, by any means necessary. Make an example that every independent operator from Baltimore to Boston would remember. Valone spent 14 days studying Bumpy's operation, mapped every collection house, identified every runner, tracked Bumpy's daily routines, interviewed police contacts, analyzed weaknesses. His assessment was clinical. Johnson operates through respect and intelligence. He has minimal muscle, maybe 20 enforcers who can actually shoot. His power is psychological. If we eliminate him publicly and brutally, the operation collapses within hours. No second in command has his reputation. No one else can hold loyalty. Valone wrote his plan in a leather notebook, the same way he'd done for 17 previous operations. Step 1. Maximum force. 40 men. Full armament. Step 2. Public confrontation. Strip him of mythological status. Step 3. Execute Johnson. Display the body. Step 4. Occupy all collection houses simultaneously. Estimated resistance. Minimal. Estimated duration. 6-8 hours. Estimated casualties, opposition. Total. But Valone had something Bumpy didn't expect. A spy inside Bumpy's inner circle, someone who'd been feeding intelligence for 3 weeks. March 14, 1952, 11:47 p.m. Bumpy received a phone call at his apartment on Sugar Hill. The voice was calm, familiar, terrified. They're coming tomorrow night. Valone's bringing 40 men. They're hitting the Palm Café first. It's a death squad, Bumpy. Bumpy hung up, stood at his window overlooking Harlem. 40 men meant the commission wanted total annihilation, not negotiation, not intimidation, extinction. He could run, disappear, rebuild somewhere else. But if he ran, Harlem would belong to men who saw his community as nothing but profit. Men who would flood these streets with heroin, turn children into addicts, and extract every dollar without giving a damn who starved. Bumpy lit a cigarette, made 4 phone calls. Then he did something no one expected. He went to bed, slept 8 hours, and woke up ready for war. What Bumpy did next surprised everyone, including Valone. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't planning to survive. He was planning to win. The first real battle was about to begin, but the battlefield wouldn't be the Palm Café. It would be a chessboard Bumpy had been setting up for 3 years. March 15, 1952, 2:47 a.m. The convoy rolled up Lenox Avenue like a funeral procession. 10 cars, 40 men. Enough firepower to invade a small country. Anthony Valone sat in the lead Cadillac, reviewing his notebook one final time. Everything was precise, synchronized. The Palm Café had 3 exits, all would be covered. Johnson had been spotted entering alone 2 hours ago. His 20 enforcers were scattered across Harlem at various collection houses. Isolated, outnumbered, finished. The cars stopped. Doors opened. 40 men emerged into the pre-dawn cold, breath misting, weapons ready. Valone straightened his coat and walked toward the Palm Café's entrance. Through the window, he could see Bumpy Johnson sitting alone at a table, reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. No bodyguards, no weapons visible, no fear. Valone smiled. The man was either stupid or suicidal. He pushed open the door. The cafe went silent. Bumpy didn't look up. "Mr. Johnson," Valone said, his voice measured and professional. "My name is Anthony Valone. I represent interested parties who believe Harlem's current arrangements require restructuring." Bumpy turned a page of his newspaper. "We've brought 40 men to facilitate this transition," Valone continued. "You have 2 options: accept a reasonable settlement and relocate, or resist and face immediate consequences. I advise the former." Bumpy finally looked up. His eyes were calm, almost amused. "You counted wrong," Bumpy said quietly. Valone's smile faded. "Excuse me." "You brought 40 men," Bumpy said, folding his newspaper carefully. "You should have brought 400. Valone's hand moved toward his weapon. That's when the lights went out. Not just in the Palm Café. On the entire block. Bumpy had spent 3 years paying Con Ed electrical workers. 5 minutes before Valone's arrival, every streetlight from 133rd to 137th Street went dark. And in that darkness, Harlem moved. Bumpy's 20 enforcers weren't scattered. They were positioned on rooftops, in doorways, behind dumpsters, across fire escapes. But they weren't alone. Bumpy had made 4 phone calls the night before. To men who owed him favors. To families he'd protected. To fathers whose daughters he'd kept safe from dealers. To shop owners whose businesses he'd defended. 147 men answered his call. Valone's 40 gunmen had been divided into 4 groups covering the cafe's exits. In the darkness, each group was surrounded by 30-plus Harlem residents armed with pistols, shotguns, baseball bats, and rage. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When the lights came back on, the streets were painted red. 23 of Valone's men were dead. 14 more were critically wounded. 3 escaped, running toward their cars only to find the tires slashed and engines disabled. Bumpy Johnson stood in the doorway of the Palm Café, untouched, still holding his newspaper. Valone, bleeding from a shoulder wound, stared at him in disbelief. "How?" Valone gasped. Bumpy stepped forward. "You studied my operation. I studied my community. You brought soldiers. I am the neighborhood." Police flooded the scene at 3:15 a.m., but the officers on Bumpy's payroll had already secured the perimeter. The official report would read, "Gang violence, unknown combatants, investigation ongoing." No arrests were made. No witnesses came forward. Valone survived. Barely. His 3 surviving men drove him to a mob-connected doctor in Brooklyn. The doctor removed 2 bullets and gave Valone a message from Frank Costello, "Come home." But Valone wasn't finished. From his hospital bed, he made a call to Chicago, to men who'd served under Capone, to old-school enforcers who believed territory was conquered through attrition, not tactics. "I need more men," Valone said into the phone. "Johnson won round 1, but wars aren't won in one night." The siege of Harlem was just beginning. March 16th, April 2nd, 1952. What followed was 17 days of urban warfare disguised as organized crime. Valone regrouped, called in reinforcements from Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. By March 18th, he had 65 men fortified in 3 locations: a warehouse in East Harlem, a social club on 116th Street, and a hotel on Amsterdam Avenue. His new strategy: attrition warfare. Cut off Bumpy's income sources, target his runners, make operating in Harlem too expensive to sustain. March 19th, 4 of Bumpy's runners were beaten on 145th Street. Collections dropped 30%. March 22nd, Valone's men firebombed 2 Numbers collection houses. $47,000 in cash destroyed. March 24th, a shootout at the Savoy Ballroom left 2 of Bumpy's enforcers wounded. But Bumpy was planning something nobody saw coming. A move so calculated, so ruthless, that Valone would never see it until it was far too late. Bumpy didn't retaliate. He adapted. He moved his collection operations underground. Runners switched to coded signals. Money transfers happened through church donations and barbershop transactions. Numbers draws were announced through radio advertisements disguised as grocery store sales. Premium tomatoes 3 for $137, the radio would say. The winning number, 137. Valone's intelligence network couldn't track it. The FBI couldn't prosecute it, and the Italian enforcers wandering Harlem looking for collection houses found nothing but empty storefronts and silent neighbors. But Bumpy was doing something else. Something Valone wouldn't discover until it destroyed him. He was building a trap. April 3, 1952. Bumpy met with a man named Thomas, the accountant Greco, an Italian numbers man who'd worked for Valone in Chicago but had quietly relocated to New York after a disagreement over payment. "You want revenge?" Bumpy asked. "I want my money," Thomas replied. "Valone owes me $47,000 from the Boston operation, says I skimmed. I didn't." Bumpy slid a ledger across the table. "I need the locations of every safe house, every weapons cache, every supply route Valone's using in Harlem." Thomas studied the ledger, saw numbers that made sense. Bumpy's operation was profitable even under siege. More importantly, Bumpy kept clean books. "You pay on time?" Thomas asked. "To the dollar," Bumpy said. "Ask anyone." Thomas picked up a pen and started writing addresses. By dawn, Bumpy had complete intelligence on Valone's entire operation. 3 weapons caches, 5 delivery routes, 2 counting houses, and the location of Valone's personal residence, a brownstone in the Bronx under an alias. But Bumpy didn't strike. Not yet. He handed the information to the NYPD Organized Crime Division, specifically to Captain Raymond Sullivan, a stray tarot cop who'd been trying to nail the Italian mob for 8 years. "Anonymous tip," Bumpy said, sliding an envelope across Sullivan's desk at a prearranged meeting. "Everything you need to shut down a major racketeering operation." Sullivan opened it, stared. "This is." "Where did you get this?" Bumpy stood. "Does it matter? You've got locations, dates, transaction records, and enough evidence to secure warrants. You want the mob out of Harlem or not?" Sullivan made the call. April 5, 1952. 6 a.m. NYPD raided all 3 of Valone's weapons caches simultaneously. Seized $340,000 in cash, 73 firearms, and arrested 19 men on racketeering charges. Valone's supply lines severed. Valone's reinforcements in jail. Valone's war crippled. What happened next became the stuff of legend because Bumpy Johnson wasn't finished. He was closing in for the kill. April 6, 10, 1952. Valone was down to 23 men, no resupply, no reinforcements, and every day more of his soldiers deserted. Harlem wasn't worth dying for when the operation was collapsing. Frank Costello sent word, "Cut your losses, come home." But Valone had never lost. His entire reputation, his entire worth was built on 100% success. If he retreated now, he'd be finished in the underworld. He decided on one final play, assassination. If he couldn't take Harlem, he'd eliminate Bumpy Johnson and let chaos fill the vacuum. The commission could clean up the pieces later. Valone positioned his 3 best shooters on rooftops overlooking the routes Bumpy traveled daily. He studied Bumpy's patterns for 4 days. Every morning, 7:15 a.m., Bumpy walked from his Sugar Hill apartment to a diner on Edgecombe Avenue. Same route, same time, predictable, vulnerable, killable. April 11th would be the day. But on April 10th, Valone received a phone call at his hotel. The voice was calm, familiar, terrifying. "Mr. Valone, it's Bumpy Johnson. I think we should talk." "How did you get this number?" Valone demanded. "The same way I got your Bronx address. The same way I know your mother lives in Cicero, Illinois, at 447 West 22nd Street. The same way I know you're down to 23 men and Frank Costello wants you to quit." Valone's blood went cold. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the Palm Café, just you and me," Bumpy said. "You can try to kill me afterward if you want. But hear me out first, because what I'm about to offer will save your life and your reputation." The line went dead. Everything had led to this moment. One final meeting between the man who'd never lost a war and the man who'd just beaten him at every turn. What happened next would change organized crime forever. April 11th, 1952, 1:55 p.m. The Palm Café was empty except for the owner, a man named Cecil who'd known Bumpy for 15 years and knew when to make himself scarce. Bumpy sat at the same table as before, same navy suit, same newspaper, same cup of coffee. At 2 p.m. exactly, Anthony Valone entered. He was alone, as instructed, but his right hand hovered near his coat, where Bumpy knew a .38 revolver sat in a shoulder holster. Valone took the chair across from Bumpy. His face was drawn, exhausted. The bandage on his shoulder was visible beneath his shirt collar. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Valone broke the silence. "You wanted to talk. Bumpy folded his newspaper, set it aside, looked Valone directly in the eyes. "You're a professional," Bumpy said, "so I'm going to speak to you like one. You came here to take Harlem. You failed. You lost 23 men in the first battle, 19 more to the NYPD, and the rest deserted. You have no supplies, no reinforcements, and no exit strategy that doesn't end with you dead or humiliated." Valone's jaw tightened. "Get to the point." Bumpy leaned back. "The commission sent you here because they think Harlem belongs to them. They're wrong. Harlem belongs to Harlem, but—" Bumpy paused, let the word hang. "I'm not stupid enough to think I can fight the 5 families forever. Eventually, you'd send 100 men, then 200. You'd burn this neighborhood to ash before you'd let me win." Valone nodded slowly. "So you want terms?" "No," Bumpy said. "I want you to go back to Frank Costello with a deal, one that makes everyone rich and keeps Harlem independent." Valone's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." Bumpy slid a single sheet of paper across the table, typed, detailed, professional. "Harlem's numbers racket generates 20 million annually," Bumpy said. "I pay the commission 15%, 3 million a year. In exchange, Harlem remains independent territory. No Italian soldiers. No forced partnerships. No interference in how I run operations." Valone studied the paper. 3 million buys respect," Bumpy continued. "It also buys peace. The commission gets guaranteed income without the headache of occupation. I get to protect my community from the heroin and corruption your people bring. Everyone profits." Valone looked up. "Costello will never accept 15%. He'll demand 50, minimum." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "Then tell Costello this," Bumpy said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "If he sends more men, I'll do what I did to you, but worse. I'll arm every black man in Harlem. I'll turn 20 square blocks into a war zone that makes the police shut down your operations in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. I'll give the FBI every piece of intelligence I have on 5 family operations. I'll make Harlem so expensive, so bloody, so radioactive with federal heat, that the commission will spend 10 years cleaning up the mess." "Or," Bumpy continued, "Costello takes 3 million a year for doing absolutely nothing. 15% of 20 million, forever. No war, no heat, just profit." Valone stared at him. "You're insane," Valone whispered. "No," Bumpy said. "I'm the only man in this city who understands what you're about to learn. Power isn't about how much you can take, it's about how much you can keep." Valone leaned back in his chair. His hand moved away from his weapon. For the first time in his career, Anthony the Fixer Valone, the man who'd cleared territories for Al Capone, the man who'd never lost a war, felt something unfamiliar. "Respect, you beat me," Valone said quietly. "Tactically, strategically, completely. You turned my own people against me. You used the cops as your soldiers. You made Harlem into a fortress I couldn't crack." Bumpy nodded once. Valone continued. But you're offering me a way out, a deal that makes me look like I negotiated a win instead of retreating from a loss. I'm offering you the truth, Bumpy said. You lost this war, but you don't have to lose your reputation. Go back to Costello. Tell him Harlem negotiated from strength. Tell him Bumpy Johnson is paying tribute because he respects the commission's power, not because you forced him to. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, but make sure he understands one thing. Bumpy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. If the commission ever tries to take Harlem by force again, the next man they send won't go home at all. Valone stood. He picked up the paper, folded it carefully, put it in his coat pocket. He extended his hand. Bumpy stood and shook it. You're the smartest man I've ever fought, Valone said. Bumpy held his gaze. And you're the first man smart enough to know when he's lost. Valone walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Johnson, what would you have done if I'd said no? Bumpy's expression didn't change. You'd have never left this cafe. Valone looked through the window, saw the shadows, saw the positions, saw the trap he'd walked into. He smiled, a genuine, exhausted smile. Checkmate, Valone whispered. He walked out into the Harlem afternoon, climbed into a borrowed car and drove back to the Bronx. The war was over. Bumpy Johnson had won. April 12-30th, 1952. Anthony Valone returned to Chicago 3 days later. He met with Frank Costello in a private room at the Copacabana nightclub. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. According to witnesses who later spoke to federal investigators, Valone presented Bumpy's offer. Costello listened, smoked 3 cigars, then asked one question. Is this N really willing to go to war with the entire commission? Valone answered simply, yes, and he'll win. Costello thought for a long time. Finally, he spoke. $3 million a year is more than we were making from Harlem when we weren't trying. And it costs us nothing. No soldiers, no heat, no problems. Tell Johnson the commission accepts. 15%. Harlem stays independent. He steps out of line once the deal's done. On April 30th, 1952, representatives from the Genovese, Lucchese, Gambino, Colombo, and Bonanno families met with Bumpy Johnson in a neutral location, a warehouse in the Bronx. The commission's terms were simple. 15% of Harlem's numbers profits paid monthly, no expansion into Italian territories, no cooperation with federal law enforcement, mutual respect and non-interference. Bumpy signed. But he added one clause the commission didn't argue with: no heroin sales in Harlem, no exceptions. Frank Costello's representative looked at Bumpy, nodded, agreed. The treaty held for 11 years. Bumpy Johnson became the only black crime boss in American history to negotiate an equal-standing agreement with the Italian Mafia's ruling commission. Not as a subordinate, as a partner. But the cost was real. 37 men had died defending Harlem that night in March. Most were neighborhood men, fathers, brothers, sons, who'd answered Bumpy's call because they believed in him. Bumpy attended every funeral, paid for every burial, supported every widow and orphan. They died for Harlem, he told one grieving mother. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Harlem was worth it. And he did. 1952-1963. The treaty changed everything. With stable income and no territorial wars, Bumpy reinvested his profits into Harlem. He funded businesses, supported churches, kept drug dealers away from schools. And when the civil rights movement exploded in the 1960s, Bumpy quietly provided financial backing to organizers who needed protection from violent opposition. Malcolm X called Bumpy a man of principle in a world without principles. The two met frequently. Malcolm saw Bumpy as proof that black men could command respect and power in a white-dominated world. Bumpy taught me that intelligence is the ultimate weapon, Malcolm said in a 1963 interview. That dignity isn't given, it's taken and defended. But the world was changing. By the early 1960s, heroin was flooding into Harlem despite Bumpy's no-drug clause. The Italian families weren't keeping their promise. Young dealers, disconnected from Bumpy's generation, saw the drug trade as easy money. Bumpy fought back, violently. He personally shut down 3 major heroin operations, beat dealers in the street, made examples that were brutal and public. "You poison this community," he told one dealer before breaking both his legs. "You answer to me." But Bumpy was 60 years old. His enforcers were aging, and the young wolves didn't fear the old legends the way they used to. In 1962, Bumpy suffered his first heart attack. Minor, but a warning. His doctor told him to retire. Bumpy ignored the advice. "I stop when Harlem's safe," he said, "not before." July 7, 1968. Wells Restaurant, 146th Street and 7th Avenue. Bumpy Johnson was playing chess. His opponent was a young man named Freddie, a neighborhood kid Bumpy had been mentoring, teaching strategy, teaching patience. It was late morning. The restaurant was nearly empty. Bumpy had just captured Freddie's queen when he paused, put his hand to his chest. "Mr. Johnson," Freddie asked. "You okay?" Bumpy smiled, a real smile. "I just realized something," he said quietly. "I've been fighting my whole life, and I'm tired." He slumped forward. The heart attack was massive. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was pronounced dead at Harlem Hospital at 11:47 a.m. He was 62 years old. His funeral 4 days later drew over 7,000 people. Preachers, criminals, business owners, children he'd helped, mothers he'd protected. Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, attended. So did representatives from the 5 families, a sign of respect unheard of in 1968. Frank Costello, now retired, sent flowers with a card that read simply, "He was a worthy opponent, and a man of his word." Bumpy was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, the same cemetery where Dutch Schultz and other legends of New York's underworld rested. But unlike them, Bumpy Johnson's grave was visited continuously. For decades, Harlem never forgot. The legend lives. In the decades since his death, Bumpy Johnson has become more than a historical figure. He's become a symbol. Hollywood immortalized him. Denzel Washington portrayed him in American Gangster. Forrest Whitaker brought him to life in the series Godfather of Harlem. Dozens of books, documentaries, and academic papers have analyzed his life, his tactics, his impact. But the real legacy isn't in Hollywood. It's in Harlem. To this day, old-timers in Harlem tell stories about Bumpy Johnson, about the time he faced down 40 men, about the treaty he negotiated, about the dealers he beat, about the children he protected. Bumpy was proof, one elderly resident said in a 2019 interview, that we could stand up to anyone, that intelligence and pride could beat money and guns. Historians have noted that Bumpy's treaty with the Commission was unprecedented. Dr. Michael Woodiwiss, organized crime historian, wrote, "Bumpy Johnson achieved what no other non-Italian crime figure managed in the 20th century. He forced the Mafia to recognize territorial sovereignty, not as a subordinate but as an equal. That alone makes him one of the most strategically brilliant figures in American criminal history." But perhaps the most telling tribute came from an unexpected source. In 1995, a retired FBI agent named Vincent Mahoney published his memoirs. In them, he wrote, "We spent 30 years trying to bring down Bumpy Johnson. We failed, not because he was untouchable, but because every time we got close, the community protected him. They loved him more than they feared us. That's not power through intimidation. That's leadership. Anthony Valone, who survived until 1987, gave only one interview about the Harlem War of 1952. When asked what he learned from Bumpy Johnson, Valone said, "That violence is the last resort of men with no imagination. Bumpy taught me that the smartest man in the room doesn't have to be the loudest or the most armed. He just has to see what everyone else misses." Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, but the lesson he taught, that intelligence, community, and strategic thinking will always defeat brute force, lives on. What happened in Harlem in March of 1952 wasn't just a gangster story. It was a masterclass in strategic thinking. Bumpy Johnson faced an enemy with superior numbers, superior firepower, and the backing of the most powerful criminal organization in America. And he won, not by matching force with force, but by understanding something most people never learn. True power isn't about what you control, it's about what you understand. Bumpy understood his community, understood leverage, understood that loyalty earned is worth more than fear imposed. He turned his disadvantages into advantages. He made his enemies' strengths into weaknesses. And when he sat across from Anthony Valone, the man who'd never lost, Bumpy didn't just defeat him. He gave him a path to dignity. That's not just intelligence. That's wisdom. The lesson applies far beyond Harlem streets. In business, in conflict, in life, the person who sees 3 moves ahead will always defeat the person who only sees the next punch. Imagine it one more time. March 15, 1952, the Palm Café. Bumpy Johnson sitting alone reading his newspaper surrounded by 40 armed men who came to kill him, and walking out alive, victorious, untouchable, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the smartest. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 1905-1968, the man who made the Mafia kneel. If this story of strategy, respect, and intelligence defeating overwhelming force moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got dozens more untold legends from America's hidden history. And let me know in the comments, what other historical crime figures should I cover next? Frank Matthews, Stephanie St. Clair, the Purple Gang. Drop your suggestions below. Remember, power isn't about how loud you are. It's about how clearly you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.